Hey, what's up? Good evening, everybody. This, of course, welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, a place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, of course, as well as inspiration. Of course, I'm your host, King Von Jr. You can follow me on social media on Twitter /X at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's X page at Victory Pod 1. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also the social media producer for, of course, none other than Perfectplex Talk Radio, of course, on Mondays at 6 p.m., hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox. So, with that being said, first things first, there's a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to wrestling, and, as well as gaming as well, and it's all along with sports. Some pretty much have all pretty much 3 and 1, if you will. So so for one, especially when it came to the Sweet 16 and Elite 8, so now we're on the way to the Final Four. Of course, this weekend, and the national championship is going to be next Monday. With that being said, I want to give a recap of some of the Sweet 16 games. So, so this past Thursday, Purdue defeated Texas, 79-77. Iowa defeated Nebraska 77-71. Illinois defeated Houston 65-55. Cougars got knocked out. Arizona defeated Arkansas, crushed them 109-88. That was on Wednesday, and then on Thursday, that was on Thursday, Then next up on Friday, that's where things really heated up for the Sweet 16, and all these take place in DC, by the way. Duke defeated St. John's 80-75. Michigan defeated Alabama 90-77. UConn defeated Michigan State 67-63. And so Tennessee defeated Iowa State 76-62. So that's it for the Sweet 16. Now the Elite 8 is when things really heated up. As we saw, Illinois bounce out Iowa 71-59. Arizona knocked out Purdue 79-64. Michigan, just ran Tennessee, out the arena and off the map, 95-62. And of course, thankfully, UConn defeated Duke 73-72. So that's the Elite 8, and now the Final Four is going to boil down to, of course, start off on Saturday. Final Four is going to be on Saturday, so it boils down to UConn, the number 2 seed, versus Illinois, number 3, and then of course you have 2 number 1 seeds, Michigan versus Arizona. So that's definitely shaping up to be some very exciting basketball. And if anything, that's something I'm a big fan of, especially when it comes to basketball. As one of my all-time favorites anyway. Even though Tar Heels got knocked out, but I definitely want to see outside them. Like UConn is definitely a program. I'm really following and investing in. Of course, with the Michigan Wolverines, I definitely want to see those two, in the national championship. But either way, I really don't have a dog in the fight. I just want to see some great basketball. So, and speaking of basketball, I am going to have to dive into this. But of course, especially when it comes to this whole situation with Jaden Ivey, I know I've talked about it pretty much almost ad nauseum on social media. And so. And of course, for those that don't know, there was a guy who played for the Bulls named Jaden Ivey, who was just recently released, because of how he expressed his beliefs, but the delivery of it was really caught people off guard, and really became a distraction for the team, and so and plus because of that, it's kind of detrimental to the team, and he wasn't really that much of a major asset, if you will. You know what I mean? And so because of that, the Bulls, decided to cut ties. And so and they did what they had to do, as a business decision standpoint. So I respect that. I stand by that. Um, you know, Here's the thing about it, right? Is one thing for someone to, you know, um, to have certain beliefs and faith and things like that. The NBA has no issue with that, right? It becomes another thing altogether when when you start to become a distraction for the team. When, you know, um, your behavior when it comes to, certain type of, questions that you ask your teammates and all this other type of stuff is very invasive. It comes off as harassment at a certain point. And so, it's one thing to, it's one thing to um, evangelize and have a zeal without knowledge, right? Like I said, it's one thing to be on fire, to have zeal, and things like that. But it's important to read the room. That's number one. You know, Discernment is key. I mean, and so, um, and the thing is, and the thing about it is that when you don't have discernment, when you don't know how to read the room, you know, and you don't have a filter, that those are the type of things that that those are things that are really really hurt you in the long run, and you shoot yourself in the foot with the things that you say, right? And so there was a video recently, where he was talking about players being righteous and unrighteous, and talking about Steph Curry and stuff like that. Um, for one, like I said, like not only did he go after specific specific marginalized group of people, aka alphabet LGBTQ, that's a huge audience, if you will. Um, but not only that, but you name drop someone who's a legend in and of himself, and someone who was proclaimed proclaimed Jesus before, and had Philippians 4:13 on his shoes and whatnot. And so and for you to target him of all people, but yet meanwhile there've been receipts that have come out about Jaden himself. What I mean, so not very favorable things. After this video came out, what I mean, and so um, if anything, that could have been a door for mentorship. That could have been a door for for discipleship and whatnot, right? But yet because of your immaturity, you definitely close that door and burn so many bridges all across the league, and to have a platform, to have a platform like the NBA, I mean, that's a tremendous blessing to be a light to so many to so many people, and your approach is something that like I said, it's not just what you say, but how you say it. Your delivery can make or break. And in his case, his delivery was very off-putting, and I know it turned off a lot of people. May have considered, like I said, may have considered Christianity, may have considered Jesus and everything like that. But because of that, but because you express yourself in a way that's really comes off as hate speech. That's a turn off. That's a major turn off. Because the thing about it is, as I've said on Facebook, and other platforms, the thing about it is that bigotry is not fruit of the spirit. Bigotry, disguised as religion, no, that's very divisive. Um, and so there's always a way to to do those things. And so I'm pretty sure somebody he wants to do what God wants, what God will have him to do. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure number one, I firmly believe that God will want you to to mind your own business, and also and the thing about it is it's important for some and also actually not only to mind your own business, but also to treat people with with kindness, with love and kindness and honor, and and integrity, and to walk in integrity and to walk in humility. You know what I mean? And also like to be a light through your conduct, right? And so there's a way that you can preach and witness, with your conduct and your game, and when necessary, then you go ahead and speak. But the thing is, the best way to preach and the best way to witness is through your actions, is through your conduct, is through the way that you live, the way that the way that you play. You know what I mean? And that those are ways that you can truly witness to people and be a testimony and to be an example. You know, um, rather than rather than come off with hate speech that turn people away. Um, and so what I mean, as far as that, um, and plus there have been other athletes, especially in the NBA, who profess their faith, who confess, confess Jesus, and also have had extraordinary careers. You know what I mean? For one, guys like Steph Curry and David Robinson, prime examples. You know what I mean? Even someone like AC Green as well. Say when you look at Steph and you look at the Admiral, those guys have been NBA champions, highly successful, highly decorated careers, outright legends. The Admirals are in the Hall of Fame. You know what I mean? And so and Steph is going to be on his way, very, very soon. So when all is said and done. You know what I mean? So as far as that's concerned, I believe those guys have the platform and have accomplished enough to where when it's time, when they do witness, there are people who respect what they have to say, right? And so when you are in that position, it's like to spread the gospel and to really be a light amongst darkness. It's best that it's best that you walk in integrity. It's best that you walk in honor. It's best that you walk in humility. It's best that that you make sure that you have consistent enough conduct. Nobody's perfect. I'm not saying that, but at the same time, um, just carry yourself, in a way that would be inviting, because you never know, when the time comes, you never know when the door opens, to express your faith and to share your faith and to share your story. It's very possible. You know what I mean? And in terms of disagreeing with a particular lifestyle, I mean that should be the least of anybody's issues, especially the least of anybody's concern, especially when you have much more rampant issues all across the league when it comes to stuff, when it comes to things like gambling, like I said, when it comes to gambling, domestic abuse, you know what I mean, assault, all these different type of things that have run rampant in these locker rooms, and if anything, that would be, a bigger burden for me, personally. So, it's just like, like I said, the thing about it is that, using religion for bigotry is definitely not the thing to do. I just had to get that off my chest on the podcast. But, I digress. I'm going to get off this soapbox. Got this pulpit, from, if you will. And, and of course, we'll talk about, a few lighter notes. Of course, it was revealed last week, and it's going to the weekend, that Star Fox would be in the new Super Mario Galaxy movie, and so this looks like this going to be potentially open the door for for a Super Smash Brothers movie, sort of a Nintendo cinematic universe, if you will. You already had two Super Mario movies. Of course, with the cameo from Star Fox. So it's gonna, it's gonna bleed into the Star Fox movie. It's gonna, go into like the Legend of Zelda, so on and so forth. Eventually, it's gonna come into, like eventually gonna culminate into a Super Smash Brothers movie. Much like how the Marvel movies culminate into Infinity War and Endgame, and now it's gonna be, in this case, Doomsday and Secret Wars. But I think that I think Nintendo has that vision when it comes to their movies, and I'm all for it. And I'm looking to see, Super Mario Galaxy, very soon, regardless of what the critics have to say about it. So I definitely look forward to it. And plus, also that this also happens to be, the same month that the Michael Jackson movie comes out. So I'm definitely game for both of those. April is definitely gonna be a pretty epic month when it comes to WrestleMania as well as movies. And speaking of wrestling, this is the main thing, the main course, if you will. Oh, also, side note, another thing I also want to bring up too. Lately, speaking of basketball and football, tying in, we see that the nickname Iceman has reached a point of contention because Chicago Bears quarterback Caleb Williams has filed 4 applications to trademark the nickname Iceman. When of course that name is more synonymous other than Iceman from the X-Men, but it's become more synonymous in terms of sports with Spurs legend, basketball legend, the Iceman George Gervin, right? And I'm gonna say it like this, George Gervin has used that name, Iceman. He's used that nickname and created a brand off of that, a Hall of Fame career off of that, right? Someone who's been like a 12-time All-Star, whatever, multi-time All NBA, like 4-time scoring champion, all those things. He was the Spurs' very first superstar player back when they were in the ABA, and of course after the merger with the NBA and whatever. So if anything, he's one of the building blocks for the ABA itself, right? Like I said, Gervin was Spurs' first franchise player long before David Robinson and eventually Tim Duncan, so on and so forth, moving all the way down to what we see with Wemby. Like I said, Iceman laid down the blueprint. Like I said, when it came to the Spurs, right? He laid down the blueprint, even though he never won a championship. But we all know why. Anytime you're in the same era as the likes of Dr. J, Kareem, Magic, Bird, Moses, guys like that, you're definitely going to end up getting unfortunately overshadowed. But his imprint, his contribution to the game is big enough, to where he is, to where where he is recognizable in these sports circles. And the thing is, I became familiar with the Iceman, by way of video games. Like whether it was NBA Live, NBA 2K2, and like NBA Live 2002, within that time frame. So like I said, that was my first impression of Iceman, and so because of that, it made me curious and want to learn more about him. Right. So I'm one of those fans who does not dismiss things just because it happened, before my time frame. If anything, I would educate myself about players and and legends and athletes, whatever, who came before me, and to find out why they are regarded so high, why they're ranked so high, and why they like I say, what made them so great. And see what type of accolades and stats they had. So like I say, when it came to the games, when it came to the throwback jerseys, those were resource tools for them. You know what I mean? And this is even well before the advent of social media. And so I've always been one of those people who want to educate myself and not take pride in ignorance. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people, much like Caleb as well, who take pride in ignorance, who take pride in in not knowing certain things, and they take pride in making evaluations, make decisions, based off of their lack of understanding, based off their lack of knowledge, and it makes you very short-sighted. And and like I said, there's nothing, it's not the flex that you think it is. To say that to brush off someone like a George Gervin, and and say like, yeah, if anything, I don't really care to know, I don't really know about him. I wasn't around, whatever the case is, and if anything, it would behoove me to go back and do my homework. You know what I mean? If anything, if anything, I take it upon myself, to learn everything I can about, said player, said athlete, what have you, right? Because if I'm going to be the student of the game, I would like to be as educated and informed as I possibly can, so that when the time comes to have a meaningful conversation, I can actually have material to show that I know what I'm talking about. And it goes a long way when it comes to, coming up with an all-time ranking list. If you're short-sighted and being willfully ignorant, then nobody's going to take your list seriously. So we live in a culture of willful ignorance. We have so many resources at our fingertips to learn these things, to give an understanding of these things. But, we're still the least informed society of people. And because of that willful ignorance, you have people like Caleb who want to make long-term decisions based off of your lack of knowledge of who George Gervin is. And Caleb's ego's gotten inflated even more, all because of an IG comment where somebody called him Iceman, and he just ran with it, and he just took it to his head. A guy like George Gervin is cemented in NBA history. He's a Hall of Famer. His resume speaks for itself. There's no guarantee that, oh wow, Abbott Elementary is hilarious. It's April Fool's episode. But the thing is, with Caleb, there's no guarantee that he's going to have a career like that. There's no guarantee that he's even going to, have a career in the next 5 to 7 years. And that's a bad look, especially, I mean, it's a bad look, especially for him, if he tries to trademark it and come to find out things blow up in his face, and all of a sudden you see, his jersey on clearance at, TJ Maxx or Ross or something. And it's just like, that just ages so badly. And, like I say, it comes from willful ignorance and a lack of respect, and now because of that, I'm actually kind of looking at Caleb sideways now, to be honest. What I mean? Like, nah, this ain't the flex that you think it is. What I mean? So the Iceman out forever acknowledged is George Gervin. Plain and simple. Like I said, this podcast is about sports, movies, music, and everything like that. So, I've covered football, I covered basketball, I cover it all when it comes to this podcast. So, now, as I said before, now it is time to get into wrestling. And the main topic, especially when it comes to SmackDown, the main attraction, of course, is none other than the legend killer himself. Happy birthday, by the way, Randy Orton. Um, and so and just the way the way that this dude has been unhinged, especially since he's turned heel. I mean, we could definitely tell that Randy's hearing those voices in his head loud and clear. You know, and with the way that this dude went scorched earth, went nuclear uh, on Matt Cardona, formerly known as Zack Ryder, I said, "Oh man, yeah, he's locked in, he's tapped in," and not only that, but Orton even RKO Jelly Roll. Absolutely, bravo, bravo. Like I said, all heroes don't wear capes. Some have bald heads and tattoos, and in this case, it's Orton. You know, um, so I'm absolutely grateful for that. And of course also we like and of course also we saw that Carmelo Hayes lost the United States Championship after 91 days as champion, and so now Sami Zayn is going to WrestleMania as U.S. champion, going up against Trick. And no slight to Sammy. We know that he's a veteran. We know that he's more than earned his stripes in the business, and especially in the company. But Carmelo is a rising star, rapidly rising star. Um, and it would be very unfortunate, if Melo were to be inserted in a triple threat when it really could have been. I think one of the biggest plans was eventually going to be Melo versus Trick at Mania. I mean, especially with their callback to their rivalry from NXT. Why not? Like I said, Trick versus Melo in Vegas. That'd be great. You know what I mean? Especially with Trick's trajectory and his rise. Um, that would have been great. But it's looking more like it's going to be, um, Trick, Trick versus Sammy. And so, what I mean? Like, and so it's just like, all right, whatever. Um, but I think, I firmly think that it would have been better if they had Trick versus Melo, and it had nothing. And this decision had nothing to do, you know, with his wedding and anything like that. It had nothing to do with that at all whatsoever. It was just a terrible booking decision for that to happen. And I stand by that. And you know, um, we see of course we see a tag team turmoil between when it comes to the women's tag champs, the Irresistible Forces, uh, Nia Jackson, Lash Legend, along with the Bella Twins, Charlotte and Charlotte and Alexa, and Bailey and Lyra. We saw tag team turmoil, back to back shows on SmackDown and Raw, and so it's going to be a fatal four way at WrestleMania. WrestleMania, for the women's tag titles, and and I know that there was somebody online who was saying that that Lash and Nia were copying Tiffany Stratton as far as their outfit. But the people who believe that that Lash was copying, was copying a Tariff Time Tiff. Come on now, those people are clueless themselves if they really believe that. And so if anything, that yellow plaid is based off the movie Clueless. But you have a lot of people who are ignorant and don't know better. Google is free. Google is your best friend. That's all I have to say. But of course, back to like I said, when it comes to this Orton and Cody storyline, as it spilled over into the opener segment of Monday Night Raw. When Stephanie came out to a major ovation, and Raw, of course, this past Monday, Raw took place in Madison Square Garden in New York, and and how Stephanie went out of her way to bring the best out of Cody, and and talked about how dangerous how dangerous a guy like Randy Orton is, and how Stephanie knows for herself, the type of things that he can do, and all the voices that that are in Randy's head, and just how and of course of course of course talking about how Cody's not the type of man that that his dad was, and everything like that, and and meanwhile of course Orton has defeated Dusty himself as well, and just how Stephanie, Stephanie even slapped Cody, you know what I mean? And so I was like, oh, this definitely heated up. This definitely heated up even more, and you know, and of course not only when they talk about since everybody's on the topic of dads, we could definitely tell that there was of course those events mentioned, and of course everybody's of course thinking about the idea of Vince showing up at WrestleMania, especially with Stephanie being inducted into the Hall of Fame, right? So there's a pretty strong likelihood that that VKM could be making a cameo. Who knows? You know what I mean? So if anything, it'd be very interesting, to see how that dynamic plays out. And then of course you saw that saw that the Division won the tag titles, from the Usos, and I guess we saw that iShow Speed was still suffering from that Danhausen curse, I guess as you could say, and he was even dragged over the barricade by the Division, and so when Speed put on the brass knucks, originally it was meant to knock out Logan, but of course LA Knight ends up catching a stray himself, and of course because of the diversion and distraction, everything like that, the Usos lose by way of those brass knucks themselves, and wow, see that this could free up the Usos, to be even more involved in this Roman and Punk storyline. Fascinating turn of events, right? And one of the bigger segments was, and not only that, but also we saw the clash between Obafemi and Brock Lesnar, or at least what was going to happen. But of course, Paul Levesque, or Paul Levesque, as they say on the internet, decided to insert himself into the segment, and he's always been, criticized for being an attention seeker, and he got lit up online, got cooked online for inserting himself into this interaction with with Brock and Oba. I was like, yeah, not a good look, and for Triple H to literally risk his health by getting in that ring and getting in their way, because it really could have gone wrong. It really could have gotten worse. Like if anything, Triple H really could have, really could have done harm to himself, especially for someone who has a pacemaker. Like, come on now. He was risking it all for the sake of, like I said, all for the sake of attention, all for the sake of making things about himself. With a pacemaker, dude, it ain't worth it. It really ain't worth it. And we also saw Liv Morgan Unhinged calling out Stephanie Bakir. We see that that Liv's a little bit, is a little bilingual herself as well, and the thing is, when Liv said it's on site, I said, oh, I'm hooked now, But there was a lot of criticism, where people were saying that Liv looked like a certain lady who runs Turner Point, Eric Kirk, Eric Kirk, and so she definitely got, so Liv, got a lot of backlash, got a lot of, people talking online, but the thing about it is that, um, you know, nobody knows where her views are, but hopefully, I doubt that that she will lean in that direction, in terms of her views. But unfortunately, because you're in a very right wing, um, leaning company, you're going to be perceived a certain way, and I don't like to see that. Like to see Liv get caught up in those crossfires. You know, um, because personally, I'm a fan of hers. I think she's come a very long way, from where she was before. You know, Live from before versus what you see now has grown by leaps and bounds. You know, nobody's comparing her to Charlotte, Bianca. What I mean, Becky, Oscar. None of them. Nobody's comparing her, to that level. But by Liv standards, she has grown so much, and I do not want to see her become a casualty, um, because of the way that she's perceived, if that makes sense. You know, and we see that the things are heating up even more between her and Stephanie, and we also see also saw that also saw of course Roxanne Perez get involved as well. What I mean? So if anything, it looks like the Judgment Day is a majority, women's faction right now, and I am mad at that. You know, let this be, the last leg of the group. But before allegedly, that they're going to, end up splitting by, at least by the end of the year. Um, but hey, in this case, with this Act Three, I am mad at. Um, if anything, I'm more invested in this women's world title match on Raw than I am with the WWE women's championship match on SmackDown. And you can definitely tell that it's definitely not not shaping up the way it's supposed to be on SmackDown. But with Raw, I like this. Um, and so, what else? Um, and and of course, also of course, when it comes to when it comes to Roman versus Punk, you know, um, another chapter in the saga continues. You know, and this time the tables turn. Instead of Roman putting Punk through a table like he did last week, the tables turn and Punk puts Roman to the table. I said, all right now, all right now. Um, I was like, all right, at least it's heating up to what it was before. But I think the overall enthusiasm or lack thereof of WrestleMania, um, is very telling. Is really showing. It's a lot of fatigue, among the fans. Um, what I mean, I'm pretty sure those within the company itself that it's really been feeling flat, um, pretty generic, and it's been, if anything, I'll say is, it hasn't been this generic since probably the early days of WrestleMania, to be honest with you. And because ticket sales are so low, that's why they had to, pull the trigger and break the, um, emergency glass and bring in John Cena to host. John Cena has been announced as the host of WrestleMania 42. This dude can't even enjoy retirement. He can't retire in peace without them calling him. And that's because the ticket sales are among their all-time lowest. for a WrestleMania to be in Vegas, it's definitely not moving the needle the way it should. You know, in an atmosphere like Vegas, you would want it to be like the atmosphere in a place like LA and Dallas. But this is not hitting the way it's supposed to hit. Um, I know that I'm definitely going to be going to to some WrestleMania watch parties. That's confirmed. I'm definitely going to those. Um, I can't wait. But in terms of Mania right now, for back to back in Vegas, not so much. For those who are more power to you. Um, this is what happens when you know uh, TKO is so greedy that they snatch New Orleans away from snatch WrestleMania away from New Orleans, which would have been much more convenient. Which if anything, it would have been a cheaper uh, trip. It would have been more cost effective, more respectful. To people's pockets. You know what I mean? Especially when it comes to this economy. Like, come on now. And it's just like it's insane. It's ridiculous. And the thing is, it's going to be the last Mania in the States before next year, as it goes to Saudi Arabia. I don't know if it's going to still go to Saudi just because of the climate that we're in. That would be a great move. You know, and also another thing as far as Raw, we see that it's going to be, Gunther versus Seth Rollins at WrestleMania, and especially when you see the ring general has has been missing an opponent. He's in desperate need of an opponent. Of course, they need to have him on the card in the first place. I mean, obviously, like I said, obviously with his pedigree and just his credentials are enough to warrant him, a spot at Mania. And especially with him retiring. Like I said, retiring legends, whether it was Goldberg, John Cena, AJ Styles. You know what I mean? And so it only makes sense for him to have a Mania match, especially with the opponent, the caliber of Seth Rollins. And this could be a very underrated match. We never know. But yeah, if anything, that is pretty much it. As far as and also of course I also want to mention that the Penta has issued a ladder match, for the Intercontinental title. So I'm ready to see what that's going to look like. And so now it is time for the birthdays. On April 1st, no April Fool's Day. And side note, this is also the 25th anniversary of WrestleMania 17. So, but yeah, like I said, like I said, as far as April 1st, Randy Orton turns 46. On April 2nd, Marvin Gaye would have turned 87. On April 3rd, comedy legend and icon Eddie Murphy turns 65. On April 4th, of course, Iron Man himself, Robert Downey Jr., turns 61. Kelly Price turns 53. Joe Scott, of course, turns 54. Of course, my Angelou, my Angelou will turn 98. Of course, on April 5th, Charlotte Flair turns 40. Of course, Sequel will turn 81. Pharrell turns 53. DDP turns 70. And of course, Dirty Dom turns 29. And of course, on April 6th, Paul Rudd turns 57. And of course, on April 7th, Tony Dorsett turns 72. Bill Bellamy turns 61. And on April 8th, Bianca Belair turns 37. And that's it. Of course, that's it for the birthdays. And of course, before I go, I like to give a word of wisdom. As this past weekend was Palm Sunday, and of course, my word of wisdom is that one meeting with Jesus, one encounter with Jesus, can change the environment, change the room, change the atmosphere of your life. One encounter, one moment with Jesus can make all the difference and if anything, just change your trajectory of your life. And always remember, you know, um, these hosannas, they ain't loyal. You know, so as far as that, um, also remember that a witness doesn't need a microphone or IG account. Just your presence. Just surviving is a witness of itself. You know, um, and so as far as that's concerned, and God wants us to praise Him, not just for now, but what He does in the future. And always remember that you are victorious because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in last place. Please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you download podcasts. I'm also on YouTube.com. Also on youtube.com/Advon Resper Jr. Please make sure to like and subscribe for more great content. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for watching. And may this day be the absolute very best day of your life.